of Mice and Men, page 10. That was a couplet. The flame of the sunset lifted from the mountaintops, and dusk came into the valley, and a half darkness came in among the willows and the sycamores. A big carp rose to the surface of the pool, gulped air, and then sank mysteriously into the dark water again, leaving widening rings on the water. Overhead, the leaves whisked again, and little puffs of willow cotton blew down and landed on the pool's surface. "You gonna get that wood?" George demanded. "There's plenty right up against the back of that sycamore, floodwater wood. Now you get it." Lenny went behind the tree and brought out a litter of dried leaves and twigs. He threw them in a heap on the old ash pile and went back for more and more. It was almost night now. A dove's wings whistled over the water. George walked to the fire pile and lighted the dry leaves. The flame cracked up among the twigs and fell to work. George undid his bindle and brought out 3 cans of beans. He stood them about the fire, close in against the blaze, but not quite touching the flame. "There's enough beans for 4 men, George said. Lenny watched him from over the fire. He said patiently, "I like 'em with ketchup." "Well, we ain't got any," George exploded. "Whatever we ain't got, that's what you want. God almighty. If I was alone, I could live so easy. I could go get a job and work and no trouble, no mess at all. And when the end of the month come, I could take my $50 and go into town and get whatever I want. Why, I could stay at a cat house all night, brothel. I could eat any place I want, hotel or any place, and order any damn thing I could think of. And I could do all that every damn month. Get a gallon of whiskey or sit in a pool room and play cards or shoot pool." Lenny knelt and looked over the fire at the angry George, and Lenny's face was drawn with terror. "And what do I got?" George went on furiously. "I got you. You can't keep a job, and you lose me every job I get. Just keep me shoving all over the country all the time. And that ain't the worst. You get in trouble, you do bad things, and I gotta get you out." His voice rose nearly to a shout. "You crazy son of a bitch! You keep me in hot water all the time." He took on the elaborate manner of little girls when they are mimicking one another. "Just wanted to feel that girl's dress. Just wanted to pet it like it was a mouse. Well, how the hell did you know? How the hell did she know you just wanted to feel her dress?" She jerks back and you hold on like it was a mouse. She yells and we gotta hide in an irrigation ditch all day with guys looking for us. And we gotta sneak out in the dark and get out of the country all the time, something like that. All the time. I wish I could put you in a cage with about 1,000,000 mice and let you have fun. His anger left him suddenly. He looked across the fire at Lenny's anguished face, and then he looked ashamedly at the flames. So it's easy to think George is an a-hole, right? But he's holding on to Lenny. He could ditch Lenny, but I feel some responsibility to him. And so now we know why they left weed. George went to feel the fabric of a girl's dress. She pulled away. He held on. That would be, if someone walked up to me and went like this, I'd be like, "What are you doing?" But if I said, "What are you doing?" and they held on, it would escalate really fast. So we know that Lenny doesn't pick up on social cues, and he has maybe a sensory disorder. So yesterday people were saying like, he sounds like maybe he has autism. That would be an example of a symptom of autism is a sensory issue. Like don't touch my ears or don't touch my hair, or I want to feel furry, soft things. But that's all still a maybe right now. And sensory disorder does not mean you have autism. It's you could have sensory disorder and not have autism. But back in the 1930s, there would be no autism diagnosis. There would not even be a sensory disorder diagnosis. There would be a go into the mental facility and throw away the key would be how they deal with that. So it'd be dangerous to be walking around and getting in trouble, because if somebody reported you as being like having mental problems, they might just throw you in Eastern State Hospital out in Airway Heights and not let you out. It was quite dark now, but the fire lighted the trunks of the trees and the curving branches overhead. Lenny crawled slowly and cautiously around the fire until he was close to George. He sat back on his heels. George turned the bean cans so that another side faced the fire. He pretended to be unaware of Lenny, so close beside him. George, very softly, no answer. George, what do you want? I was only fooling, George. I don't want no ketchup. I wouldn't eat no ketchup if it was right here beside me. If it was here, you could have some. But I wouldn't eat none, George. I'd leave it all for you. You could cover your beans with it, and I wouldn't touch none of it. George still stared morosely at the fire. Remember, morose is not sad. Morose is contemplating life, which sometimes is sad. When I think of a swell time I could have without you, I go nuts. I never get no peace. Lenny still knelt. He looked off into the darkness across the river. George, you want I should go away and leave you alone? Where the hell could you go? Well, I could go off in the hills there, someplace I'd find a cave. Yeah, how'd you eat? You ain't got no sense enough to find nothing to eat. I'd find things, George. I don't need no nice food with ketchup. I'd lay out in the sun and nobody'd hurt me. And if I found a mouse, I could keep it. Nobody'd take it away from me. George looked quickly and searchingly at him. I've been mean, ain't I? If you don't want me, I can go off in the hills and find a cave. I can go away any time. No, look, I was just fooling, Lenny, 'cause I want you to stay with me. Trouble with mice is you always kill 'em. He paused. Tell you what I'll do, Lenny. First chance I get, I'll give you a pup. Maybe you wouldn't kill it. That'd be better than mice. And you could pet it harder. Lenny avoided the bait. He had sensed his advantage. If you don't want me, you only just gotta say so, and I'll go off in those hills right there, right up in those hills, and live by myself, and I won't get no mice stole from me. George said, I want you to stay with me, Lenny. Jesus Christ. No, somebody'd shoot you for a coyote if you was by yourself. No, you stay with me. Your Aunt Clara wouldn't like you running off by yourself, even if she's dead. Lenny spoke craftily. Tell me, like you done before. Tell you what, about the rabbits. George snapped. You ain't gonna put nothing over on me. Lenny pleaded. Come on, George, tell me. Please, George, like you done before. You get a kick out of that, don't you? All right, I'll tell you, and then we'll eat our supper. So now we know. Grabbed a girl's dress. We have sensory disorder, evidence of sensory disorder. Grabs a girl's dress inappropriately, holds onto it. They have to run, and he sounds like he promised Aunt Clara he'd look after him. So that softens me to George. Even though he sounds like an a-hole a lot, I think it's that part softens George for me. George's voice became deeper. He repeated his words rhythmically as though he had said them many times before. Guys like us that work on ranches are the loneliest guys in the world. They got no family. They don't belong no place. They come to a ranch and work up a stake, money, and then they go into town and blow their stake. And the first thing you know, they're pounding their tail on some other ranch. They ain't got nothing to look ahead to. Lenny was delighted. That's it. That's it. Now tell how it is with us. George went on. With us, it ain't like that. We got a future. We got somebody to talk to that gives a damn about us. We don't have to sit in no bar room blowing in our jack money just because we got no place else to go. If them other guys gets in jail, they can rot for all anybody gives a damn, but not us. Lenny broke in. But not us. And why? Because I got you to look after me, and you got me to look after you. Then that's why. He laughed delightedly. Go on now, George. You got it by heart. You can do it yourself. No, you. I forget some other things. Tell about how it's going to be. Okay. Someday we're going to get the jack money together and we're going to have a little house and a couple of acres and a cow and some pigs and live off the fat of the land. Lenny shouted, and have rabbits. Go on, George. Tell about what we're going to have in the garden, about the rabbits in the cages, and about the rain in the winter and the stove and how thick the cream of the milk is. Like you can hardly cut it. Tell about that, George. Why'd you do it yourself? You know all of it. No, you tell it. It ain't the same if I tell it. Go on, George. How I get to tend the rabbits? Well, said George, we'll have a big vegetable patch and a rabbit hutch and chickens. And when it rains in the winter, we'll just say the hell with going to work. And we'll build up a fire in the stove and sit around it and listen to the rain coming down on the roof. Nuts. He took out his pocket knife. I ain't got time for no more. He drove his knife through the top of one of the bean cans, sawed out the top, and passed the can to Lenny. Then he opened a second can. From his side pocket, he brought out 2 spoons and passed one of them to Lenny. They sat by the fire and filled their mouths with beans and chewed mightily. A few beans slipped out of the side of Lenny's mouth. George gestured with his spoon. What are you going to say tomorrow when the boss asks you questions? Have you ever done that with a spoon? Like you're like, right there? When the boss asks you questions, Lenny stopped chewing and swallowed. His face was concentrated. I ain't gonna say a word. Good boy. That's fine, Lenny. Maybe you're getting better. When we get the couple acres, I can let you tend the rabbits, all right? Especially if you remember as good as that. Lenny choked with pride. I can remember, he said. George motioned with his spoon again. Look, Lenny, I want you to look around here. You can remember this place, can't you? The ranch is about a quarter mile up that way. Just follow the river. Sure, said Lenny. I can remember this. Didn't I remember about not going to say a word? Of course you did. Well, look, Lenny, if you just happen to get in trouble like you always done before, I want you to come right here and hide in the brush. Hide in the brush, said Lenny slowly. Hide in the brush till I come for you. Can you remember that? Sure I can, George. Hide in the brush till you come. But you ain't gonna get in no trouble, because if you do, I won't let you tend the rabbits. He threw his empty bean can off into the brush. I won't get in no trouble, George. I ain't gonna say a word. Okay, bring your bindle over here by the fire. It's gonna be nice sleeping here, looking up, and the leaves don't build up no more fire. We'll let her die down. They made their beds on the sand, and as the blaze dropped from the fire, the sphere of light grew smaller. The curling branches disappeared, and only a faint glimmer showed where the tree trunks were. From the darkness, Lenny called, George, you asleep? No. What do you want? Let's have different color rabbits, George. Sure we will, George said sleepily. Red and blue and green rabbits, Lenny. Millions of them. Furry ones, George, like I seen in the fair in Sacramento. Sure, furry ones. 'Cause I can just as well go away, George, and live in a cave. You can just as well go to hell, said George. Shut up now. The red light dimmed on the coals. Up the hill from the river, a coyote yammered, and a dog answered from the other side of the stream. The sycamore leaves whispered in a little night breeze. The bunkhouse was a long rectangular building. Inside, the walls were whitewashed and the floor unpainted. In 3 walls, there were small square windows, and in the 4th, a solid door with a wooden latch. Against the walls were 8 bunks, 5 of them made up with blankets, and the other 3 showing their burlap ticking. Over each bunk, there was nailed an apple box with the opening forward, so that it made 2 shelves for the personal belongings of the occupant of the bunk. And those shelves were loaded with little articles, soap and talcum powder, razors, and those Western magazines ranchmen love to read and scoff at and secretly believe. And there were medicines on the shelves, and little vials, combs, and from nails on the box sides, a few neckties. Near one wall, there was a black cast iron stove, its stovepipe going straight up through the ceiling. In the middle of the room stood a big square table littered with playing cards, and around it were grouped boxes for the players to sit on. At about 10 o'clock in the morning, the sun threw a bright dust-laden bar through one of the side windows, and in it and out of the beam flies shot like rushing stars. The wooden latch raised, the door opened, and a tall, stoop-shouldered old man came in. He was dressed in blue jeans, and he carried a big push broom in his left hand. Behind him came George, and behind George, Lenny. The boss was expecting you last night, the old man said. He was sore as hell when you weren't here to go out this morning. He pointed with his right arm, and out of the sleeve came a round stick-like wrist, but no hand. You can have them 2 beds there, he said, indicating 2 bunks near the stove. I'm going to highlight the no hand thing because What if later it's like somebody's like needs a rescue or something with a rope and the guy can only pull with one hand or something? George stepped over and threw his blankets down on the burlap sack of straw that was a mattress. He looked into this box shelf and then picked a small yellow can from it. Say, what the hell's this? I don't know, said the old man. Says positively kills lice, roaches, and other scourges. What the hell kind of bed you giving us anyway? We don't want no pants rabbits. The old swamper shifted his broom and held it between his elbow and his side while he held out his hand for the can. He studied the label carefully. Tell you what, he said finally, last guy that had this bed was a blacksmith. Hell of a nice fella, and as clean a guy as you want to meet. He used to wash his hands even after he ate. Then how come he got graybacks? Probably like lice. George was working up a slow anger. Lenny put his bindle on the neighboring bunk and sat down. He watched George with open mouth. Lots of open mouth references, too, to Lenny. Tell you what, said the old swamper, this here blacksmith named Whitey was the kind of guy that would put that stuff around even if there wasn't no bugs, just to make sure, see? Tell you what he used to do. At meals, he'd peel his boiled potatoes and he'd take out every little spot, no matter what kind, before he'd eat it. And if there was a red splotch on an egg, he'd scrape it off. Finally quit about the food. That's the kind of guy he was, clean. Used to dress up Sundays even when he wasn't going no place. Put on a necktie even, and then set in the bunkhouse. I ain't so sure, said George skeptically. What did you say he quit for? The old man put the yellow can in his pocket and he rubbed his bristly white whiskers with his knuckles. Why, he just quit. The way a guy will. Says it was the food. Just wanted to move. Didn't give no reason but the food. Just says, give me my time one night. And the way any guy would. George lifted his tick and looked underneath it. So they're calling the bunk a tick. I'm not sure why. He leaned over and inspected the sacking closely. Immediately, Lenny got up and did the same with his bed. Finally, George seemed satisfied. He unrolled his bindle and put things on the shelf. His razor and bar of soap, his comb and bottle of pills, his liniment and leather wristband. Then he made his bed up neatly with blankets. The old man said, I guess the boss will be out here in a minute. He sure is burned when he wasn't here this morning. Come right in when we was eating breakfast and says, where the hell's them new men? And he gave the stable buck hell, too. George patted a wrinkle out of the bed and sat down. Gave the stable buck hell? He asked. Sure. Yeah, see, stable buck's an N. N, huh? Yeah, nice fella, too. Got a crooked back where a horse kicked him. The boss gives him hell when he's mad. But the stable buck don't give a damn about that. He reads a lot. Got books in his room. So I accidentally said boss. This is not the boss. It's like probably the owner or something of the ranch. So that was how casually they throw that word around at a first meeting. Like, think of that. That's not that long ago. Only like 80 years ago, and people are throwing that word around casually with no like, oh, I hope I don't offend anybody. Like, not even any thought of offending people. What kind of guy is the boss? George asks. Oh, and I like how Steinbeck throws in that the black person reads a lot. So, like, not only is he calling out the grossness of casually throwing that word around, but he's also saying he's a smart person. Well, he's a pretty nice fella. Gets pretty mad sometimes, but he's pretty nice. Tell you what, know what he done Christmas? Bring a gallon of whiskey right in here and says, drink hearty, boys. Christmas comes but once a year. The hell he did, whole gallon? Yes, sir. Jesus, we had fun. They let the N come in that night. Little Skinner named of Smitty took after the N. Done pretty good, too. The guys wouldn't let him use his feet, so the N got him. If he could have used his feet, Smitty says he would have killed the N. The guy said on account of the N's got a crooked back, Smitty can't use his feet. He paused in relish of the memory. After that, the guys went into Soledad and raised hell. I didn't go in there. I ain't got the poop no more. Lenny was just finishing making his bed. The wooden latch raised again and the door opened. A little stocky man stood in the open doorway. He wore blue jean trousers, a flannel shirt, a black unbuttoned vest, and a black coat. His thumbs were stuck in his belt on each side of the square steel buckle. On his head was a soiled brown Stetson hat, and he wore high-heeled boots and spurs to prove he was not a laboring man. The old swamper looked quickly at him. High-heeled cowboy boots, that's so your boot doesn't slip out of the stirrup. I don't know if you've ever ridden a horse. If they get going and you don't have that heel, you can if they're going and you're like kind of out of control, and if your foot goes through the stirrup, you're in big trouble. Because they're going and you're bouncing, and then your foot starts smacking them on the ribs accidentally, and they go faster and faster. And so that keeping that foot in that stirrup is very important. The old swamper looked quickly at him and then shuffled to the door, rubbing his whiskers with his knuckles as he went. Oh, he wouldn't be the owner if he was the old swamper. I'm not sure what a swamper is, but definitely not the owner. Them guys just come, and shuffled past the boss and out the door. The boss stepped into the room with the short, quick steps of a fat-legged man. I wrote Murray and Reddy and wanted 2 men this morning. You got your work slips? George reached into his pocket and produced the slips and handed them to the boss. It wasn't Murray and Reddy's fault. Says right here in the slip that you was to be here for work this morning. George looked down at his feet. Bus driver got us a bum steer. We had to walk 10 miles. Says we was here when we wasn't. We couldn't get no ride in the morning. The boss squinted his eyes. Well, I had to send out the green teams short 2 buckers. Won't do any good to go out now till after dinner. He pulled his time book out of his pocket and opened it where a pencil was stuck between the leaves. George scowled meaningfully at Lenny, and Lenny nodded to show that he understood. The boss licked his pencil. What's your name? George Milton. And what's yours? George said, his name's Lenny Small. The names were entered in the book. Let's see. This is the 20th, noon the 20th. He closed the book. Where you boys been working? Up around Weed, said George. You too? To Lenny. Yeah, him too, said George. The boss pointed a playful finger at Lenny. He ain't much of a talker, is he? No, he ain't. But he's sure a hell of a good worker. Strong as a bull. Lenny smiled to himself. Strong as a bull, he repeated. George scowled at him, and Lenny dropped his head in shame at having forgotten. The boss said suddenly, Listen, Small. Lenny raised his head. What can you do? In a panic, Lenny looked at George for help. He can do anything you tell him, said George. He's a good skinner. He can wrestle greenbags, drive a cultivator. He can do anything. Just give him a try. The boss turned to George. Then why don't you let him answer? What you trying to put over? George broke in loudly. Oh, I ain't saying he's bright. He ain't. But I say he's a goddamn good worker. He can put up a 400-pound bale. The boss deliberately put the little book in his pocket. He hooked his thumbs in his belt and squinted, one eye nearly closed. Say, what you selling? Huh? I said, what stake you got in this guy? You taking his pay away from him? No, course not, I ain't. Why you think I'm selling him out? Well, I've never seen one guy take so much trouble for another guy. I just like to know what your interest is. George said, he's my cousin. I told his old lady I'd take care of him. He got kicked in the head by a horse when he was a kid. He's all right, just ain't bright. But he can do anything you tell him. The boss turned halfway. Well, God knows you don't need any brains to buck barley bags. But don't you try to put nothing over, Milton. I got my eye on you. Why'd you quit in Weed? Job was done, said George promptly. What kind of job? We was digging a cesspool. All right, but don't try to put nothing over, because you can't get away with nothing. I've seen wise guys before. Go on with the grain teams after dinner. They're picking up barley in the threshing machine. Go out with Slim's team. Slim? Yeah, big tall Skinner. You'll see him at dinner. So when they're saying dinner, they're talking about lunch. He turned abruptly and went to the door. But before he went out, he turned and looked for a moment at the 2 men. When the sound of his footsteps had died away, George turned on Lenny. So you wasn't going to say a word? You was going to leave your big flapper shut and leave me do the talking. Damn near lost us the job. Lenny stared hopelessly at his hands. I forgot, George. Yeah, you forgot. You always forget. And I gotta talk you out of it. He sat down heavily on the bunk. Now he's got his eye on us. Now we got to be careful, not making no slips. You keep your big flapper shut after this. He fell morosely silent. George, what do you want now? I wasn't kicked in the head with no horse, was I, George? Be a damn good thing if you was, George said viciously. Save everybody a hell of a lot of trouble. You said I was your cousin, George. Well, that was a lie, and I'm damn glad it was. If I was a relative of yours, I'd shoot myself. He stopped suddenly, stepped to the open front of the door, and peered out. Say, what the hell you doing listening? Ooh,